Hello and welcome to the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by Alex Lloyd Hunter, the co-founder of The Dad Shift. Alex, it's an absolute pleasure. How are you doing today?
Good. Thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Amazing. Really excited to get into this conversation. It is extremely at the forefront and I'm excited to get into it. But as always, Alex, in your own words, what makes you a man?
So this is a really interesting question that my answer to this would change constantly. And I guess part of the point of your podcast and part of what we're trying to do with our campaign around paternity leave is to recognize that that's changing. And there is this ongoing conversation about how we define that. And I'm trying for myself to work out what are the things I've been told and taught about being a man that actually I want to get rid of, and what are the things that I want to hold on to. But some of the things that I feel like I really want to hold on to, I want to be dependable and kind of a rock for my friends and my family, someone they know they can always come to and rely on. I want to be someone who looks out for others and is selfless and uses the kind of strength or resources or whatever I have to look out for others as well as myself. And I think those are kind of classical male ideals in some sense that I think are good and worth holding on to.
Amazing. And you mentioned that you're thinking about that. Do you think that's changed as you became a father, or is it more just the exploration of man?
I think for me, a lot of the work around changing this happened before I became a dad, and I was really intentional about what kind of father I wanted to be. And I'm lucky that my wife is really clued up on this stuff, and we had a lot of conversations about it over years. And so, before I was a dad, I worked hard to let go of the stuff around how appropriate it is to show emotion and in what ways. And I had to work through some of my anxieties about, I always felt that when I was a teenager, I'd be the kind of guy who'd walk past a baby and they'd look at you and just cry. I was sort of that uncomfortable around babies and had no real role models about how to do it. And to work through some of that and say, actually, that's not necessarily me. That's stuff that's, that's about how we condition men. A lot of that work before I became a dad. And I think it really has stood me in good stead to be the kind of dad that I want to be.
Do you think men who are sort of becoming fathers, do you think the sort of later in life approach to fatherhood, which is a bit more common now, do you think that's why men are having these sort of thought processes around fatherhood and what they want to do with their kids?
That's interesting. I've not really thought about that before. But yeah, I can definitely see that being part of it. You get a degree of self-awareness and emotional maturity as you get older. I know for us, we took ages for us to get pregnant. In the end, our son was an IVF pregnancy. So in a way that we had a lot of time, unintentionally, a lot of time to work through this stuff. And that probably helped. That may well be part of it. I also think there is much more of a conversation going on in society. There is much more focus on this question of what it means to be a man. And I think a lot more recognition that is in flux at the moment. So I think that is prompting some really healthy introspection, as well as some quite unhealthy kind of countervailing messages around, actually, we need to go backwards rather than forwards.
Yeah, I think about it a lot. This idea of as we age, we are more sort of emotionally aware and sort of go through those processes. But I'm trying to work out what the answer is, because I don't have any kids right now, but I do think about it, and I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of maybe my father and my friends' fathers who maybe had kids at 18, 19, 20, 22, whatever it may have been, that sort of younger age. And then I'm already older than my dad was when he had me. And it's is that why I'm more aware of it? Or is it society as a whole that's sort of shifting the roles as well? So it's sort of what is a dad as well as what is a man. So yeah, I find it just fascinating. I just wondered if you had an opinion on it or had come across conversations.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, if I think from my own experience, I was having a son when I was 22. I mean, no way would I have been ready, and nowhere would I have been able to have been, hopefully as good a father as I tried to be. because you do need all these skills. You need that like emotional awareness, you need patience, you need the ability to, I think when you're younger, it's much harder to separate what is going on inside your head and your body from yourself, if that makes sense. Like it's all consuming, and it's like this reality is reality and it's here. And actually, as you get older, you get a bit of distance to say like, this is temporary, or this is a situational thing, and I think all those skills are really helpful for good parenting. So yes, you're right, that kind of age and wisdom, for want of a better word, I think is probably really helpful.
Because we sort of have that granddad effect, if you will. Like you sort of see how your dad is or your friends' dads are with their kids, and it's a bit like where was this when I was growing up, kind of thing. It's an interesting balance. Do you think there is something there with sort of granddads? Do you think they're changing?
I think granddads are fascinating in this space. So like the reason I wanted to start this campaign around paternity leave, the UK has rubbish paternity leave. Like that's a big reason. It's the worst in Europe. 2 weeks paid at less than half a minimum wage, nothing if you're self-employed. But my kind of passion for the area has very much come from my own experience with my dad. And he is now a very soppy, devoted granddad to my son, almost to my surprise, because that very much wasn't how his experience when we were children. Obviously men of his generation, no paternity leave at all. My older brother was born 9 o'clock Sunday night. He was back at work 9 a.m. on Monday morning the next day. He worked long hours, stressful job, a lot of commuting, wasn't involved in looking after us, wasn't really there 5 days a week. And he ended up pushed to the periphery of the family, didn't have a strong bond with us as children, and it contributed to the breakdown of his marriage. And that, I remember experiencing all that even when I was younger and saying, I feel like he is missing out here. And so very much grew up knowing that when I wanted kids, I wanted to be different. But as he has got older, he's a great granddad, and suddenly all these kind of skills and abilities to play with the kids and like show that kind of emotional connection are there. And I've seen that in other men. I've spoken to other men of that generation. You hear that countless times. And actually some of the sort of polling data we've got suggests that it's granddads who recognize the importance, perhaps even more than fathers, younger fathers. They recognize the importance of being able to be there and be involved. And I suspect this, as you get that age and that wisdom, you realize actually that was the most important thing in my life. That was the most fulfilling thing I had. And the tragedy is for a lot of men, they were locked out of it by the system and the cultural norms, and that is changing, but it's not changing. It's not changed enough, and paternity leave is still one of the biggest systemic barriers to that.
Yeah. So what is the Dad Shift? Explain that to the listeners.
So the Dad Shift is a campaign for better paternity leave in the UK. We launched in September 2024, so we're still pretty new. And we are campaigning for longer, better paid paternity leave that includes self-employed people. So the UK, as I say, has the worst paternity leave in the whole of Europe. The average across Europe is about 8 weeks at full pay. If you're somewhere like Spain, you get 16 weeks at full pay. Sweden, 90 days plus 300 days to share with your partner. So you compare that to our 2 weeks paid at £187 a week, about a third of the minimum wage now, and nothing at all if you're self-employed. We really are miles behind. And that causes big problems for everyone in the family. It means that mothers get left as the primary caregiver by default after just days after they've given birth, whilst they're often still recovering from maybe a C-section, for example, which can take 6 weeks. And we've been sent stories of mothers who literally ripped their stitches from their operations because they were just left alone carrying things they weren't ready to carry because there was no one there. And it's also the point at which they're most at risk of developing postnatal depression. It means that dads don't get that opportunity just as you're starting to get your head around, how do I look after this baby? I'm starting to bond with them, then you're gone. And that's it. So you miss out on that crucial early chance to build that relationship with your child. And for so many families, that reverberates through the rest of the child's life, and they're always closer to the mother, and they always go to the mother for what they need. And finally, for children themselves, like it's really good. There's so much evidence that it's really good if they have a father that they are closely involved in their life. They'll grow up happier, they'll do better in school. There's been this whole conversation recently off the back of Adolescence on Netflix about, particularly with boys, how important those male role models are to help steer them through this kind of confusing morass of what it means to be a man today. But we're making that so difficult. So it's a big issue. We are miles behind other countries, and we're trying to bring together dads, parents, non-birthing parents, people who want to have kids in the future, to mobilize as many people as possible to call for change.
What do you think is what's needed in the UK? So you mentioned Spain, 16 weeks, but you also mentioned Sweden, which obviously has a set period, and then a combination of sort of sharing days between the partners, right? What do you
Yeah.
think is needed in the UK?
So longer term, we need to get to a system where it's a decent amount of time. So there's three principles. One, that it's substantial, like a good amount of time, so you can be there for those crucial weeks. You can bond with your child. You can take some of the pressure off the mother. Secondly, that it is properly paid. Like, if there's no good giving people 6 months of paternity leave if no one can afford to take it. And already in our current system, you see like massive financial hardship that's caused. Like, people message me saying, I hope my child is born on a Friday because I'll at least have the weekend off before I go back to work on a Monday, because I just can't afford. I can't afford a week. Someone said all I can afford is 2 days. I'm planning, when do I take my 2 days? So you need the pay. And the third thing is that we, longer term, like Sweden's model, it'd be great to have substantial leave that is equal, so that both parents get a good amount of time and then they can decide between them what works best for our family. It's not dictated to them by gender. It's like, actually, how do we want to do it? And at the moment, our system just completely robs people of that choice. We recognize that, Sweden's been building towards their paternity leave for about 50 years. Like, we're not going to get there overnight. So the absolute bare minimum that we need to get to next is 6 weeks at 90% pay. That's what you get in the first part of maternity leave. And there's a ton of evidence that 6 weeks would massively beneficial, a huge step forward, make a huge difference to families. And crucially, it needs to include self-employed people as well. They have exactly the same needs around this. And they are some of the worst affected people on insecure work, on low paid work that doesn't have an employment contract. They're some of the people who are suffering the most from this.
Do you think this is, you mentioned self-employed, but do you think this affects more lower social economic classes rather than sort of your more stable, higher paid roles where maybe they have something built into their contract anyway as a bit of a benefit?
Yeah, but the people, so I think it affects everyone negatively, but the people, you're right, who are most negatively affected are people on lower incomes. And I sometimes often come across this assumption in this area, which is one of the things that I find it incredibly patronizing, actually, the idea that it's a woke issue. And sort of built in within that is it's only like middle class dads who want to spend more time with their children. The working class dads, they just want to be down the pub. Like, that's the kind of assumption behind it, which I find very patronizing. And it's just not true. Like, all the evidence we see is that actually in some of the data, the support is highest for this amongst people on lower incomes, because everyone wants to spend more time with their kids. But that's a pretty universal thing these days. Like, okay, not literally everyone, but but evidence says like 90% of dads agree that these days fathers want to be a bigger part of their kids' lives, for example. And it is those on the lowest incomes who can't afford the leave, who are about half of people who take paternity leave end up in financial hardship. It's so expensive to have a baby. And at that same time, you're taking a massive hit to your income. It is the people on the lowest incomes and the insecure work who are missing out most. We do also have problems across the board, though. And you're right, more and more big companies are recognizing actually this benefits them as a business to offer something more than statutory, because it means that they get better staff recruitment and retention, but also people don't come back like knackered on the verge of a breakdown after 2 weeks, which you see way too often. So often it's though people with access to those are the ones who are doing better in the system, but actually a lot of those companies, there's still a cultural barrier to people taking it. And so until we improve the system for everyone and it becomes more normalized across the whole of society for men to be more involved and take more time with their families when their babies are born, it's actually really hard to lift all boats, even those in the kind of higher end of the income scale.
You mentioned that it's sort of perceived as a woke issue. There's an argument that maybe some dads wouldn't sort of know what to do in those 2 weeks, maybe sort of twiddling their thumbs. But let's look at it from an equality point of view. What are the benefits to the partner in that situation, with them sort of both being at home for I think you mentioned 6 weeks, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, to start with, it's definitely possible. Some people wouldn't know what to do. I think we get a lot of conditioning as men, as dads. I call it the kind of Homer Simpson model, that like you're kind of useless and you'll get in the way, and you still come across those attitudes too often. But I can tell you what I did. I had 6 weeks off. I was running my own company. I was really lucky. I was able to set the policy. I had 6 weeks. Absolutely life-changing for my wife and I. I'll tell you what I did. So my son really struggled with feeding. So he was born a heavy baby. He dropped right down to the bottom of the income the weight scale. He wasn't earning, unfortunately. And so we had to go into the hospital for appointments every other day to try and get on top of his feeding. He also wouldn't sleep in his cot. So he had to sleep on one of us 24 hours a day. So if I had not been there, or I'd be having to go into work the next day, my wife would have been getting literally zero sleep. So he slept on me in the nights, and I supported my wife with pumping and with sterilizing the bottles and the pumps. I made sure that she had food. I took the baby out for walks when she needed a sleep, chucked him in the pram and went for a nap, took him out for a drive if he needed a sleep. I made sure that the house was sort of half tidy and we weren't just being consumed by all the stuff that you have no time to do. And I was there just to emotionally support her. I was up at night with her, helping her breastfeed, keeping her awake, making sure it wasn't her just on her own. You talk to any mother who's been through this and had the partner there or didn't have them there, and they will tell you how crucial that support is. So yeah, this idea that men can't do anything is nonsense. And that's even before you start talking about how important it is to have that time so you can bond with your child, and that bond carries on longer term.
It is really interesting, that Homer Simpson model, because there is that perception of like the woman has the baby and then the man goes back to work, and once the baby reaches 2 and can start doing things, that's when the dad sort of kicks in. What do you think's missing from society, education to change that narrative?
I think there's a lack of awareness of some of the biological changes that happen to men when their babies are born. So there's a researcher called Dr. Anna Mackin who's done really interesting work about this, written a book about it. And she talks about the hormonal changes that men go through, for example, when a baby's born. Like, we've evolved to do this. And she talks about the fact that actually it was an evolutionary imperative when babies started getting bigger brains. So they were born earlier, so they were more helpless. And suddenly mothers couldn't manage the care alone, or even in the community of other mothers, it was much more important that fathers were there to carry that burden early on, help them carry the load. And so we evolved for that to happen, and we go through hormonal changes and other physiological changes to make that possible. So I think that's just a sort of basic scientific thing that's quite a helpful thing to understand, which is this is not something we are trying to, an unnatural, for want of a better word, thing we're trying to force onto men. We've evolved to do this, and actually the way we do it in society at the moment is, if anything, unnatural. I think that's an important thing. I think another thing is just getting these systemic barriers out of the way, which stop people from changing their behavior. Because when you can change your behavior, that then reinforces itself. It reinforces the cultural norms. So if you look at a country like Sweden, and you read occasionally about the latte papas, these kind of very stylish Swedish dads who go out with their prams and have lattes and stuff. But the basic idea underneath that is it's almost the opposite. If you were a father in Sweden who didn't take time off after your baby was born, you would be really frowned upon. That would be seen as not socially acceptable. It's almost the opposite here. And they've got to that place partly because they put in place the kind of structural support in their policies with things like good paternity leave that say, look, you should be here. This is your role. It helps change those norms because people respond to those barriers, and then the cultural force reinforces itself.
I've seen a few posts that they may be from yourself or they may be from others that are sort of having this conversation around conversations that men have had with their employers when they've been looking to take the sort of 2 weeks themselves. Some may say quite misandry in their ways, sort of referring to them as women, or even potentially, even if it's a joke in a sense, but essentially saying you'll be fired if you take these 2 weeks. Have you got any sort of stories on that side of things?
Yeah, we do. I mean, one of them that springs to mind was a legal case that was reported a couple of months ago. Someone was described by their manager as, quote, going off to grow a pair of tits by going on paternity leave. And this idea that it's, again, a feminine space, it's emasculating to want to be there for your child. And actually, there's data to back this up as well. We did some polling recently, and about 50% of men said they would be worried for their careers if they took a decent amount of paternity leave. That is still there. But I think the hopeful thing around it is So you take Spain, as we talk about Spain a lot because they're really interesting on this. So they 7-8 years ago, they had the same as us. They just had 2 weeks. And over the course of a few years, they increased their paternity leave by a week or two a year. And so now they have this 16 weeks full pay. And what you see is, because it is a decent amount of time and because it's properly paid, everyone takes it in every sector of society. You're as likely to take it as if you work in manufacturing, as if you work in finance. And I think it's telling that some of the countries that I think have some of the biggest problems around these gender norms persisting, like the United States is another one, are also the countries where they have some of the worst provision for paternity leave and other kind of family support that make it easier for fathers to play a role. And until you move those barriers, it's just very difficult to move the dial.
It's really interesting that Spain has done that, because I spent a bit of time in Madrid, and for me, Spain sort of holds on to traditional norms quite a lot. I think it's very apparent that there's man and woman, and it's like they have specific roles. So it's interesting that they've done that and seen a change and a shift in that, because all in all, that must have some sort of benefit towards equality and for women, right?
It does, yeah. The government did a report on how it's gone so far about a year ago, and they say they're already seeing, anecdotally, qualitatively seeing a shift in the amount of childcare that men are taking on. Actually, one of my favorite examples is Iceland, who brought in what was then the best paternity leave in the world back in 2000. And before then, they just had a form of shared parental leave, basically. So the only way you could take time off as a father was to transfer some of the maternity leave over to you. And literally no one was using it. There was 1 year where in the mid-90s, where 8 people in the whole of Iceland, 8 men took some form of parental leave. It's like less than a football team. And so they brought in this paternity leave, 3 months, a good level of pay. And overnight, that went up to 80%. And within about 5-6 years, the percentage of couples saying we are sharing childcare equally when the child is, say, 3 years old or older, went from about 30% again up to something like 80%. So just a massive, very rapid shift in what the norms were in how couples divided childcare. And again, like, that's something that is, our campaign is not about saying this is how you should do it. It's about saying you should have the choice to do it that way. And actually, there's a bunch of evidence that that's a really good way to do it. It's good for you, it's good for your partner, and it's really good for your kids.
One of the things that is mentioned is that sort of still exists in inequality is the gender pay gap, and the sort of argument against that, as sort of proven with same-sex couples, is that for the number of kids that they have, that's where the reduction in the wage comes from. Is there any statistics from these other countries to show that gets reduced when there's equal sort of paternity leave for men as well?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So you're right. What you see with the gender pay gap now is until the age people have children, it's pretty tiny. And then it absolutely balloons from that age onwards. And about 75% of the gender pay gap now is attributed to the motherhood penalty, which is what you've described, where women end up taking a step back from work to take on the childcare. So the evidence from Sweden, the evidence across countries with 6 weeks paternity leave or better is that brings down the gender pay gap by about 4%. And there's a study from Sweden which showed that for every month of parental leave a father took, the mother's earnings went up by about 7%. So there is a very clearly established link between better paternity leave and reducing the gender pay gap.
One thing that I want to sort of ask, because it's more my personal opinion on it, is we've seen a shrinkage in family sizes. So we've seen sort of people go from no kids to one kid, whereas I'm a sibling of 4, so there's 4 of us in total. Do you think we'll see an increase in family size again? Because I really benefit from having siblings, and I'm quite concerned that we're becoming a society of only children.
Yeah, I think this is a real problem. The birth rate is falling off a cliff in this country and around other places in the world as well. And one of the reasons for that is just, in the words of one of the MPs who backs our campaign, it's too expensive and too exhausting to have children in this country. And you also, what you see, which is like really sad actually, is that these days it used to always be that people on lower incomes had lots more children. That's completely reversed now. So if you look at like Western European countries like ours, it's people who with more money who are having more children than people with less money. And there's a gap between the amount of children people want to have and the amount of children they feel they can have, and money is one of the biggest problems. But I mean, there are big, deep-seated cultural reasons for this as well. I don't think it's as simple as we give people better paternity leave and then suddenly people will have a lot more kids. Like, there are big economic barriers we need to solve as well, like the cost of childcare, flexible working, and so on. And there are cultural things we need to solve as well. But I think the fact that families are so poorly supported, and so a lot of people see like it's hard work to have children, it's expensive to have children, you may not get a break, you may not have people around you like you might have done a generation ago. That kind of it takes a village approach. That's less common now. And they look at that and they think, I don't know if I can do that. I don't know if I want to do that. And that's a real problem and like a really sad thing. So tackling the economic factors, I think, is a really important starting point, but it's probably not the whole picture.
Yeah, it just fascinates me. I know, like, it's sometimes mums don't want to go back to work because they're just essentially fueling the childcare cost, which is just a broken system before you've even started on that. What's the benefit of even going to work if you're just funneling it into an organization? So yeah, I do get that as well. But yeah, it's just interesting to see whether we can keep growing as a population, because it's nice, right, to have more people around. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to live in I don't want to be 80 and living in a society that's only people who are 80. I think that would be rubbish. Kids are the lifeblood of society and bring all the kind of joy. And no one should feel any pressure to have children, of course. But I think the tragic thing is people want them and they can't have them, and like that's what we need to solve. So yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic because that's also something that's not really talked about as well. I did see a really nice post actually on Father's Day around the fathers that wanted to be fathers that couldn't be. I know this isn't obviously your full expertise, but your child was through IVF, and that's quite a common thing. I have friends who've had kids through IVF. It's almost the sort of the common thing. Do you feel there's less of a stigma around that, or do you think there's still a bit of a stigma for men to talk about wanting children?
Yeah, I think there is still a stigma, which is changing, but I definitely feel it's there around male infertility. For my wife and I, we're one of about 30% of people who do IVF where there's no cause. Like, we did all the tests and like we can't work out why you can't have kids, but it's not working, so we'll do IVF. Okay. But even in that context where I had scientific evidence that I wasn't infertile in any way, I felt like this is quite a hard thing to talk about. There's this very deep-seated association between fertility and masculinity, and I do think that's changing. And we've actually been, partly because of that, we are proactive in talking about the fact we did IVF. We go out of our way to try and mention it because we want to just normalize that. And actually, like, this is a whole different topic, but access to IVF in this country is really bad. Like, it's a complete postcode lottery. So that's also something that we should be fixing. But yeah, I think there is some stigma around that still, and it needs to change.
Yeah, I think there's a whole can of worms there, right? From pregnancy loss to baby loss to infertility to IVF to maybe it all just starts with, if you can have more paternity leave, it allows you to be a little bit more open as a father or a potential father. I think that might be something that unlocks that conversation a little bit more, maybe for men. Not too sure, but yeah, that's sort of the idea. Just going back to sort of the dad shift as a whole, I grew up around a time of men climbing famous landmarks dressed as sort of superheroes. So that was my last sort of foyer into dads asking for something. I don't actually know how successful that was. I mean, we still hear a lot of stuff around family courts, so maybe not too successful. So what lessons have you learned from that you're simply avoiding as the dad shift?
Yeah, I think so I remember growing up in a similar time, and my takeaway always was the message I picked up is these guys don't like women. Like, there's something about this which is very anti-women. And that is the absolute opposite of what we are doing. Like, one of the whole reasons we wanted to campaign on paternity leave is that it is an issue that benefits men and women. It's good for mums. It is also good for dads. And there have been brilliant women's groups campaigning on paternity leave for a few years, for example, like Pregnant and Screwed. And no one was really organising men and dads to show up for this campaign. And actually that was something that didn't really sit right. We're saying, well, we're leaving it to, I heard someone on the radio saying it's a woman working this area saying, it's even been left up to mums to campaign for better rights for men. It's like, oh, actually that's kind of true and that's uncomfortable. And we were also making that work harder by not showing up. So, we are very deliberately in everything we do coalitional with women. And there are a bunch of, about half our supporters are women, like a bunch of women involved in the campaign doing amazing work. So yeah, that's the main lesson I took from some of that previous campaigning, is that in this space, you if you're doing it in a way that exacerbates tension between the genders, you are doing it wrong. And actually, you're fueling this idea that feminism is a zero-sum game and that men are losing out from the gains that women are making in society. Like, I don't believe that to be true. And yeah, our approach is much more positive and coalitional with women rather than opposing them.
What is some of the key milestones for the Dad Shift? What have you done to date?
So we have a combination of stunts that have got some press coverage, stuff in Parliament with MPs and ministers, and like public demonstrations. So we launched with a stunt in September. We went around, put baby slings and baby dolls on statues in London and Edinburgh. So there's one of Thierry Henry sliding on his knees outside the Arsenal Stadium, scoring a goal with a baby strapped to his chest, or Gene Kelly singing in the rain, or as his dad is called Taxi, and he's kind of hailing a taxi, and you put a sling on him, and suddenly he's like desperately late for nursery and just like trying to get there on time. He looks sort of frantic, and that got a huge amount of cut through across the world. Millions of views online, coverage on Sky, LBC, BBC, and really helped springboard the campaign. And off the back of that, we built a good online supporter base and about 40 MPs in Parliament who are backing the campaign and are working with us to bring it up the government's agenda. So through that, we've had questions at Prime Minister's Questions. We've been into Parliament to give evidence to the Women and Equalities Committee, who just published a report recommending 6 weeks paternity leave at 90% or more. And we just in the last week held the world's first ever dad strike, where we had dads, non-birthing parents, mums come out to they took a few hours off work in the afternoon, came out to picket in London and Edinburgh to call for better paternity leave, essentially. And also we had people who couldn't make the pickets just across the country, dads going and do the school pickup, because that shouldn't be a radical act, but it's something that so many men don't get the opportunity to do because we're kind of locked out of being more present. And that again got a huge amount of cut through and pick up. And we've, off the back of it, had meetings with the Secretary of State in charge of paternity leave, looking ahead to the government's plan to review it this summer. So yeah, lots of good progress so far, but still a good amount to go.
Do you think that there will be change soon? Are you hoping for a sort of Spain model where we'll give you another week?
Yeah, I think so. Lawmaking moves slowly. The positive thing is the government is reviewing parental leave as a whole starting this summer. That was a manifesto commitment that they'd do that in their first year, and they're about to announce the timings of it. And we expect that will last for about a year. So that is our once in a generation opportunity to get better paternity leave. It hasn't been improved since it was brought in 2003. And then our hope is that we will influence that review, and by the end of the review, the government will come out with a bunch of commitments on paternity leave, hopefully on maternity leave as well, which is also not good enough, far too poorly paid. And that then they will bring in a law, which might take another year or so. So how they choose to implement those changes, we're relatively agnostic about. We have to be pragmatic about the situation they are managing with the economy. If it needs to be a week or two at a time for a few years, fine. That could be a really sensible approach. But our key demand is it has to be 6 weeks, 90% as a bare minimum, and it has to include self-employed people.
Have you looked at an approach where you sort of put pressure onto big business? Is that something you've considered?
So we've here and there support people who are doing them themselves at work. We're not focusing on business specifically for one big reason, which is that this is the kind of paternity leave we need is not something that a lot of small businesses can afford to pay for themselves. And so we're already seeing this big two-tier system emerging, this gap between the bigger employers who can offer a few months of fully paid paternity leave And often smaller businesses with staff already on lower incomes who just can't offer more than like maybe a couple of weeks full pay, or they just offer statutory, they offer nothing. And if we push at big business, that gap is only going to grow. And again, it's often those who are most losing out from the system who will be least likely to benefit from that approach. So yes, we absolutely applaud businesses that are doing better on this, and we think more should follow suit. But it's not our primary strategic focus at the moment. We get a bit more kind of capacity in the campaign. We'd love to more systematically support people to run those campaigns in their workplace themselves, because that could be really powerful. But yeah, the main focus for us is statutory so that everyone can benefit.
Can you sort of explain how it works for a business, right? So maybe some business owners listening to this going, Jesus Christ, more people want to take time off. Like, how does it actually work for a business?
Sure. So I used to run a small business, about 20 staff, so have dealt with all this stuff personally. So at the moment, you can claim your staff, assuming that they've worked for you for basically 40 weeks before the due date. That is going to change next year, but at the moment it's 40 years. It's going to become a day one right. They are entitled to the 2 weeks paid at £187.18 a week. You can claim that money back from the government. In fact, if you're a small business, you can claim 108%, 108.5% of it back. So you get, an extra tenner or something. It's very token, but you get the money back. So you're not paying anything. And your employee can take either 2 weeks in one go or 1 week. If you offer something enhanced, you say, okay, we're going to top that up and give you 6 weeks at full pay, then you pay the difference. That's on the business. In terms of managing it practically, this is something that other businesses in other countries already do. They manage their staff going off for 6-8 weeks or whatever it is. And it will be a combination of, can you find cover for that person? Maybe you take a little bit less work on whilst they're off, or maybe, you don't want to just dump all their work on a colleague, but can people share some of their essential functions and put some of the other to the side? There are different ways of managing it. And when we did it in our business, we were able to just find cover for 6 weeks. And so we covered someone for that period, and then they came back and it worked fine. So I completely, having been in that position, completely understand the kind of anxieties around the pressures that are on business at the moment. They are really hard, but actually this is something that shouldn't be a massive additional pressure, and crucially is really good for businesses. The fact that the idea that you can get a member of staff back after 2 weeks, they're not sleeping and their world's just been turned upside down, and they're going to be like, yeah, cool, I'm 100% ready to go, I'm fully productive, I'm contributing. Like, that's a fantasy. Like, trust me, your employees are not contributing 100% after 2 weeks. And actually, we did some research with Movember recently, but about 45% of new dads experience multiple symptoms of depression in the first year after birth, and 82% of them said the best thing the government could do for that is better paternity leave, because that if you're pushed back into that pressure of keep the family afloat financially, keep up your boss's demands, try and be there to support your partner and be present for your kids, like, that's a lot of pressure to put someone under very soon after the birth. And no one benefits if that person then goes off sick because they become mentally ill. That's not good for the employer as well. So I would say to employers, like, there are benefits to this too. We don't think you should be responsible for fixing this. This is a government problem, and we believe you would benefit from it too.
Do you have any idea where is statutory reviewed every year, or like what does one buy with such like, how much is like 48 nappies? I feel like that's pretty much.
It goes up every April. So this April, it went up by the princely sum of about £3 a week.
Okay.
So, everyone's rolling in it now. You can't buy very much. Children are really expensive. The average pram is about twice what you'll get paid on your paternity leave, for example. Nappies costs, 15 quid for a pack of 50, something like that. If you're feeding with formula, that's expensive too. I think the figure is something like the average family spends about 10 grand on a baby in the first year. And it's not just that, it's almost like you couldn't design a system better to put massive pressure on new families. So you've got this very expensive life event where you've got all this baby stuff to buy. And at the same time, your partner is off on maternity leave for a year, which after 6 weeks, their pay drops off a cliff. They get 6 weeks at 90%, and then they go down to the statutory level too. And your paternity pay is also rubbish. So like, you're hemorrhaging money at exactly the same time as your costs are going up. And this is why you end up with so many fathers and other non-birthing parents who get paternity leave have to go back sooner than they want to, and they have to work themselves to the bone just to keep the family afloat. And then there's a guy who's working with us on the campaign called Tom, who is a self-employed landscaper. And his story around this is when he had both of his children, each time his partner had an emergency C-section, and he did the right thing, stepped up, took 6 weeks off work for each child, looked after them, looked after his partner. And by the time I met him, it was 7 years later, he said, I have still not recovered financially from that time. And the pressure, the financial pressure that was started in that moment destroyed his mental health, destroyed his wife's mental health. He attempted suicide in the end. Thankfully, he's feeling much better now. That is what this kind of system we have now is doing to families. And it's just horrendously designed, and we're well behind the rest of the world in working it out and sorting it out.
Considering there's this sort of shift in work culture and the way people work from self-employed, the government is very far behind when it comes to that. I think it took them another few weeks during the pandemic to even consider sort of self-employed people, because I was living with someone who was self-employed and he was absolutely bricking it because he was like, I can't work and I've paid my taxes for the last however many years, and I can't have anything because I'm not employed by anyone other than myself. So yeah, there is a huge gap there for sure when it comes to that. And like with that story, he'll have taken 6 weeks off, and then the first week of him back or 2 weeks of him back will be finding business again. So it's not 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and you're not getting paid until you've done 50% of your first job. So it's probably closer to 9 weeks before you've even got anything in, and that's over 2 months worth of expenses. So yeah, I can imagine it takes a while to recoup that, especially if it then goes on the credit card, and yeah, it soon sort of snowballs from there. What are your hopes for the dad shift moving forward? And what are your hopes for sort of UK dads as a whole?
So the dad shift, we see our mission as about removing the barriers that stop fathers from being more present in their kids' lives. Paternity leave is one of the biggest of those, is not the only one, unfortunately. So there's tons of other stuff for us to work on. Right, we're a tiny team. Yeah, I'm the only full member of staff, basically. And we have some amazing volunteers that work with me, particularly my co-founder, George. So there's only so much we can take on. So we're very, very focused on paternity leave. Yeah, but we want to make it easier for fathers to be there for their kids. And my hope for UK fathers is I really do think things are changing. I'm optimistic that we're going to win this campaign. And I think there's a conversation happening across society about how important it is for men to be there. And I hope that the momentum of that will carry through to like real world change.
And then just sort of as the space as a whole, what do you really like in the men's space, and what do you want to see more of?
So I have loved in the work that we're doing, getting to find out about dads groups across the country. There are not as many of these as I would like there to be. So I'd love to see more of them, but some of them are amazing. For example, we're working with the Leeds dads on the campaign, who are a dad support network in Leeds. They have a ton of dads who just come along to these events that they provide. We're also working with Dads Rock in Scotland, who put on, for example, play groups for dads on the weekends, and they get a bunch of dads along with their kids, like often people who can't afford the toys themselves at home. And it's just this kind of amazing community they're able to build. Like, these organizations don't get as much kind of recognition or support as they need. And I think those communities of dads are just so valuable. So I love those and would love to see more of them.
Amazing. Alex, it's been an absolute pleasure. If people have liked what they've heard and they want to get involved, where is the best place to find you and the Dad Shift?
So if you go to our website, which is dadshift.org.uk, there's a button at the top to add your name to back better paternity leave, and we'll then follow up with all the kind of actions you can take to support the campaign. If you're on social media, we're also on Instagram and TikTok at Dadshift UK. We're also on Facebook, and liking, sharing, commenting is hugely valuable. It helps us reach more people with the campaign. So yeah, please do go and do that.